let's get right into it. Number 10. King Arthur. You probably think you know King Arthur. Brave king, magical sword, round table, the whole deal. There's a better chance of finding a unicorn in your backyard than finding actual proof that Arthur existed. There's not a single document from the time Arthur supposedly lived that mentions him. Not one. And we're talking about a guy who supposedly united all of Britain and fought off invading armies. That's like nobody writing about World War II until the 1990s. The first real mention of Arthur doesn't show up until 300 years after he supposedly died. Imagine if people in 2324 started writing about this amazing king from our time who pulled a sword from a stone, and everyone was like, yeah, that totally happened. Geoffrey of Monmouth, the guy who really popularized Arthur's story, was basically the medieval equivalent of a fan fiction writer. This dude wrote a history book in 1136 that reads more like Game of Thrones than actual history. He claimed Arthur killed 960 men in a single battle by himself. That's some serious hack-and-slash gaming numbers right there. And Excalibur, that magical sword everyone knows about. In the early stories, it wasn't even stuck in a stone. It was handed to Arthur by a mysterious lady in a lake, which honestly sounds more like a shady weapons deal than a divine ceremony. The whole sword in the stone thing was added later. We can't even find Camelot. You'd think someone would remember where they parked a massive castle full of knights and wizards. Every town in England with a hill and 2 rocks has claimed to be Camelot at some point. That's the thing about Arthur. He might not have been real, but the hope he gave people was. Number 9. Sawney Bean. Sawney Bean, Scotland's most famous cannibal who never actually existed. You're walking along the Scottish coast in the 1500s. The sun's setting, and you hear something moving in the shadows. Suddenly, you're attacked by a family of cave-dwelling cannibals led by Alexander Sawney Bean. For 25 years, they murdered and ate over 1,000 travelers. They'd pickle and salt human body parts, leaving the leftovers to pile up in their cave. King James VI himself led an army of 400 men to capture the Bean clan, who were executed without trial. But none of it actually happened. There's not a single contemporary record of Sawney Bean or his family. No missing persons reports from the time. No court records of their execution. No mention of this massive manhunt led by the king. The first written account of Sawney Bean appeared in the 1700s, over a century after he supposedly lived. It was actually English propaganda, designed to make Scottish people look like savage barbarians. Nothing says uncivilized like a cave full of inbred cannibals. The story was so effective that people still believe it today. There's even a tourist cave in Scotland that claims to be Sawney Bean's lair. Number 8. Mulan. Mulan never existed. The earliest mention of Mulan comes from a poem called The Ballad of Mulan, from sometime between 386 and 581 AD. That's it, just a poem. No birth records, no military documents, no Employee of the Month award at the Imperial Army. The original poem doesn't even mention where in China she's from, what her family name was, or when she lived. It's like writing a story about this guy Bob who did some cool stuff somewhere at some point. In the original poem, nobody even realizes Mulan is a woman until after she goes home. She fights for 12 years, and not one person notices. Either she was really good at disguising herself, or ancient Chinese armies had really poor observation skills. It's less, I'll make a man out of you, and more, surprise, I've been bamboozling you for over a decade. Over the centuries, people kept adding to her story. By the time we hit the 16th century, writers were adding things like foot binding to her tale, which didn't even exist when the original poem was written. It's like if someone wrote a modern version of Romeo and Juliet where they break up because of Instagram drama. Even today, different versions of Mulan's story are used to push different agendas. If you need a tale about filial piety, Mulan's your girl. If you want a feminist icon, Mulan's got you covered. If you're looking for a patriotic war hero, Mulan can do that too. She's basically become the Swiss Army knife of Chinese folklore. Number 7. William Tell. Imagine being so famous that your country puts your face on everything. Stamps, coins, tourist spots, you name it. That's William Tell's life, except he never had one. You probably know the story. A skilled archer is forced by an evil governor to shoot an apple off his son's head. If he misses, both he and his son die. So Tell takes aim, splits the apple clean in half, and becomes a Swiss national hero. The earliest mention of this story doesn't show up until about 200 years after it supposedly happened. The whole apple shooting story was copied from an old Danish legend about a guy named Palnatoki. Same setup, same evil ruler, same apple on the kid's head. The evil governor in Tell's story, Gessler, There's no record of any governor by that name ever existing in that region. Even though historians have known for centuries that William Tell is about as real as Santa Claus, Switzerland just kind of ignored them. They built statues of him. They named streets after him. They even put his face on their money. The Swiss government actually got so defensive about Tell that when a historian in 1760 suggested the story might be fake, they burned his book and forced him to apologize. Talk about taking your fairy tales seriously. Number 6. Ragnar Lothbrok. Ragnar Lothbrok is the Viking equivalent of a band's greatest hits album. The Vikings had a bunch of different leaders who did amazing things. One guy raided Paris, another conquered parts of England. Someone else had some legendary sons who became great warriors. Then along come these storytellers centuries later, and they decide all this stuff was done by one guy. And just like that, Ragnar Lothbrok was born. We actually have pretty good records of Viking leaders from that time. We know about Ivar the Boneless, Björn Ironside, and other Vikings who supposedly were Ragnar's sons, but when it comes to the big man himself, nothing. No contemporary records mention him. No chronicles talk about him. Even his death story is suspiciously dramatic, getting thrown into a pit of snakes by an angry English king. That's not history. That's Hollywood material right there. The Vikings themselves probably knew Ragnar wasn't real. These stories weren't meant to be taken as historical fact. They were more like superhero movies. Entertainment with a message. The message was, look how awesome Vikings are. Number 5. Ned Ludd, the man who never was. The Luddites were angry workers who went around smashing machines during the Industrial Revolution. Their leader, Ned Ludd, was about as real as your girlfriend from summer camp who lives in Canada. The story goes that Ned was this angry weaver who absolutely lost it one day and destroyed 2 knitting machines in a fit of rage. Nobody can find any proof that this guy ever existed. The workers who were smashing machines would sign their threats and letters as King Ludd or General Ludd. They'd write stuff like, from the office of Ned Ludd, as if this imaginary angry weaver had a whole corporate setup going. Some letters even claimed Ned Ludd was hiding out in Sherwood Forest, the same Sherwood Forest where Robin Hood supposedly lived. The British government fell for it. They spent years trying to track down and arrest this Ned Ludd guy. They couldn't find him because he didn't exist. The myth worked perfectly for the actual machine breakers. Every time they smashed up a factory, they could just blame it on this mysterious Ned Ludd character. Who broke this expensive machine? Oh, that was Ned. You just missed him. Today we still use the term Luddite to describe someone who hates new technology. You're being compared to followers of an imaginary angry weaver. Number 4. Romulus and Remus. You know the story of Rome's founders. 2 brothers raised by a wolf who went on to build the greatest empire in history. Turns out that's about as real as my chances of winning the lottery. Romulus and Remus were completely made up by the Romans, who needed a cool origin story for their city. It's like Instagram influencers photoshopping their vacation pics. The Romans were doing the same thing with their history. 2 twin brothers, abandoned as babies, get rescued and nursed by a she-wolf. They grow up, decide to build a city, then get into a fight about where to put it. Romulus kills his brother and names the city after himself, Rome. The Romans didn't even come up with this story until hundreds of years after Rome was supposedly founded. They borrowed bits from Greek myths, threw in some local flavor, and created their legendary origin story. This made-up story became so important to Roman identity that they started putting it on everything. Coins, statues, buildings. And it worked so well that 2,000 years later, people still think these guys were real. Number 3. Prester John, the most powerful king that never existed. In 1165, a mysterious letter showed up in Europe. It was supposedly from Prester John, a Christian king who ruled somewhere in the east. He claimed his kingdom was filled with gold, his palace was made of crystal, and he had an army of millions ready to help fight against enemies. He also had a magic mirror that let him see everything happening in his kingdom, and fountains of youth that kept his people young. The letter described a kingdom so rich that even the poorest people wore silk. Rivers flowed with gold instead of water. There were no poor people, no thieves, and no liars in his kingdom. European rulers actually believed this letter. They spent centuries trying to find this made-up king. The Pope sent people to look for him. Explorers went on wild goose chases across Asia and Africa, trying to find his kingdom. When they couldn't find him in Asia, they decided he must be in Africa instead. The legend got so big that map makers started putting his kingdom on their maps. They weren't sure where it was, but they put it on there anyway. The story finally died out when people actually started exploring these places properly. Number 2. Sir John de Mandeville. Imagine being the most famous travel writer of your time, influencing explorers like Christopher Columbus, and having your book translated into more languages than the Bible. Pretty impressive for someone who never existed. Sir John de Mandeville was medieval England's biggest catfish. This guy supposedly wrote a travel book about his 30-year journey across the world. He claimed he saw everything from people with dog heads to trees that grew tiny lambs as fruit. It's like posting fake vacation photos on Instagram, but medieval style. The book became a medieval bestseller. Nobody could find any record of this Sir John guy. No birth certificate, no family records, nothing. It's like he was a medieval bot account that somehow wrote a bestseller. Modern historians think the real author was probably some bookworm sitting in a library. Instead of actually traveling, he just copied stories from other books and added his own spicy details. It's like writing a travel blog about Paris using only Google Street View and TripAdvisor reviews. Some of his made-up stories actually influenced real explorers. Christopher Columbus literally packed a copy of Mandeville's book when he sailed to America, using a fantasy novel as your GPS. That's what Columbus did. The book also described that the Earth was round and could be circumnavigated, centuries before anyone actually did it. It's like throwing darts blindfolded and somehow hitting the bullseye. Number 1. Robin Hood. You know that guy who steals from the rich and gives to the poor? Turns out he probably never existed. Imagine being so famous that people make movies about you centuries after you died, except you were never alive in the first place. That's Robin Hood for you. Medieval England's most successful fictional influencer. Back in medieval England, the name Robhod was basically slang for an outlaw. It was a common alias for criminals who flouted the law. The earliest stories about Robin Hood don't even paint him as a hero. He was more like that guy who posts inspirational quotes on social media, but actually just sells pyramid schemes. The whole stealing from the rich and giving to the poor thing was added later. The original Robin Hood stories were about a guy who just liked stealing and hanging out with his bros in the forest. Think less noble outlaw and more medieval frat boy with a bow and arrow. The forest laws back then were so harsh that just walking through the wrong patch of trees could get you outlawed. Imagine getting banned from society because you took a shortcut through the wrong park. These laws were so ridiculous that people started making up stories about outlaws who fought back. It's like if someone today wrote stories about a hero who fights parking tickets and wins. By the Tudor period, Robin Hood had gotten a complete PR makeover. They turned him from a rough forest criminal into a noble who fought for justice. That's like taking a story about a guy who steals cars and turning him into Batman. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.